Japanese POW generals asked for brown rice and got sushi and ramen instead. Through my rifle scope, I watched the Japanese forces scatter across the rocky terrain of Saipan. The thunderous explosions from our artillery make the ground beneath me tremble. Even from this distance, I can make out their commander, General Tadashi Mori, as we'd later learn, trying to maintain order among his men. The 43rd Division had put up one hell of a fight. For days, we'd been locked in brutal combat, but now their lines are finally breaking. Through the hazy smoke, I see the general's tall figure, standing straight despite the chaos around him. He's not running or hiding. There's something dignified about how he faces defeat. "Sir, they're falling back to the eastern ridge," Private Wilson calls out beside me. He's right. The Japanese soldiers are retreating in scattered groups, their once precise formation now in shambles. I adjust my position behind the rocky outcrop, keeping my sights trained on the enemy forces. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the battlefield, making it harder to distinguish friend from foe in the growing darkness. The air is thick with gunpowder, and the metallic smell of spent shells. "Hold your positions," I shout to my men. "Let the artillery do its work." Another barrage lights up the sky, and I watch as General Mori gestures urgently to his officers. Even in retreat, they're trying to maintain some semblance of order. I've been in enough battles to recognize good leadership when I see it, and despite being our enemy, this Japanese general has earned my respect. Through my scope, I can see the strain on the faces of the Japanese soldiers as they scramble for cover. Some are wounded, being helped by their comrades. Their uniforms are caked with dirt and blood, just like ours. In moments like these, the line between enemy and fellow soldier becomes blurry. "Sergeant Hayes," Lieutenant Parker calls from behind me. "We're getting orders to advance. They're cornered against the eastern cliffs." I signal to my squad to move forward. We advance carefully through the bomb craters and scattered debris, always keeping our eyes on the retreating Japanese forces. The setting sun paints the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, a beautiful backdrop to this ugly scene. As we close in, I can hear scattered Japanese commands being shouted. General Mori's voice carries across the battlefield, firm and controlled despite their desperate situation. Through my interpreter's training, I catch fragments of his words, something about honor and duty. The Japanese officers have gathered around their general, their backs literally against the cliff walls. There's nowhere left to retreat. Our forces have them surrounded on 3 sides, and the ocean lies behind them. The artillery has stopped, leaving an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional crack of rifle fire. "They're finished," Wilson whispers beside me. "No way out now." I watch through my scope as General Mori confers with his officers. Their gestures are animated, but their voices don't carry to our position. The tension in the air is palpable as we wait for their next move. Then something unexpected happens. General Mori straightens his uniform and turns to face our lines. He says something to his men, and slowly, one by one, they begin laying down their weapons. The sound of rifles and swords hitting the ground echoes across the battlefield. The war, at least for these men, is over. As I lower my rifle, I can't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. These soldiers, who'd fought so fiercely, are now surrendering with the same dignity they'd shown in battle. "Hold your fire," I order my men, though no one seems inclined to shoot. We all watch in silence as the proud soldiers of the 43rd Division prepare to become prisoners of war. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. I watched the Japanese officers board our transport ship, their faces drawn and tired from the Battle of Saipan. General Mori caught my attention right away. He carried himself differently than the others, head held high despite the defeat. Even in surrender, there was something commanding about him. "Keep moving," I said in the basic Japanese I'd learned, gesturing toward the ship's hold. The general's eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw a flash of surprise at hearing his own language. The hold was cramped and stuffy. As each group of prisoners made their way down, the smell of sweat and sea salt grew stronger. I noticed some of the younger soldiers looking terrified, but General Mori remained stoic, speaking quietly to his men in Japanese. Though I couldn't catch all the words, his tone was steady, reassuring. "Water rations will be distributed every 4 hours," I announced in both English and Japanese, pointing to the water drums we'd secured. "Medical attention is available if needed." The prisoners remained silent, but I could see the confusion in their eyes. They'd clearly expected worse treatment. As we pulled away from Saipan, the ship's engines vibrated through the metal walls. I kept watch as the prisoners settled into their designated spaces, some sitting cross-legged on the floor, others leaning against the walls. The gentle rolling of the waves made the cramped quarters feel even more confining. Throughout that first day, I observed General Mori maintaining order among his men with quiet dignity. He organized them into shifts for the limited space near the few portholes, ensuring everyone got some fresh air. When one young soldier became seasick, Mori spoke to him softly, helping him through it. "Sergeant Hayes, Captain Miller called me over. We'll be rotating groups up to the deck for fresh air. Start with the officers." I nodded and approached General Mori's group. "Please follow me," I said in Japanese, then switched to English. "Time for some fresh air." The suspicious looks on their faces were clear. They probably thought we were leading them to something terrible, but they followed orders, filing up the narrow stairs to the deck. The afternoon sun was bright, and I saw several of them squint as their eyes adjusted. General Mori stepped out last, his face revealing nothing as he looked out at the vast Pacific. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, Saipan now just a distant memory behind us. The salt spray carried on the wind seemed to rejuvenate the prisoners, though they remained cautious and quiet. Days passed like this as we made our way toward California. I maintained my regular shifts guarding the prisoners, watching as they slowly settled into a routine. They remained disciplined, following our instructions without resistance, but always with that underlying tension of uncertainty about their fate. During one afternoon deck rotation, I noticed General Mori staring intently at the horizon. The sea breeze ruffled his uniform, and for a moment, his carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. There was worry in his eyes, though he quickly masked it when he noticed my attention. The closer we got to American shores, the more the atmosphere changed among the prisoners. They spoke in hushed tones, their anxiety palpable. Even General Mori, despite his composed exterior, seemed to stand a little more rigidly during deck time, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for the first glimpse of California. I watched the Japanese officers file off the transport ship, their faces a mix of exhaustion and wariness. The California sun beats down on the dock as General Mori leads his men with quiet dignity. Even in defeat, there's something commanding about him that demands respect. "Keep it orderly, men," I call out to my fellow soldiers. "No shoving, no rushing. I've been assigned to oversee their transfer to the train, and I'm determined to do it right." The prisoners move in precise lines, their military training evident in every step. Most avoid eye contact, but General Mori catches my gaze briefly. There's a flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but a guarded uncertainty. "Water and rations will be provided on the train," I announce in my basic Japanese. The general's eyebrows raise slightly at my attempt at his language, but he doesn't respond. The dock buzzes with activity as we load them onto military transport trucks. The short drive to the train station is quiet except for the rumble of engines and occasional cough. I notice General Mori whispering something to a younger officer beside him, probably trying to keep his men calm. At the station, our train waits on a side track, a long string of passenger cars modified for prisoner transport. It's not luxurious, but it's decent. The Japanese officers eye it warily as we begin boarding procedures. 3 to a bench, I instruct, gesturing to show what I mean. You'll have room to stretch your legs. The summer heat is stifling inside the cars. I order the windows opened, earning surprised looks from some of the prisoners. Maybe they expected to be packed in like cattle. Instead, they find padded seats and space to move. General Mori sits rigidly, his back straight as a board, hands folded in his lap. The countryside rolls past as we chug eastward. Hours stretch into days. I make regular checks through the cars, making sure everyone has enough water and their basic needs are met. On the second day, I notice the general watching me as I hand out lunch rations. His face is unreadable, but I can tell he's studying everything. How we treat his men, how we interact with each other, every detail. "More water?" I ask him in Japanese, holding out a canteen. He accepts with a slight bow, his movements careful and measured. The landscape changes as we push toward Wisconsin. Green fields replace desert, forests thicken, and the air grows cooler. Some of the younger officers press their faces to the windows, taking in this strange new country. Finally, Camp McCoy comes into view. It's not what most people picture when they think prisoner of war camp. Clean barracks stand in neat rows. There's a mess hall, medical facility, even a recreation area. The perimeter fence is there, of course with guard towers, but it doesn't dominate the scene. As we lead them off the train, I see General Mori taking it all in. His expression remains neutral, but there's a slight easing in his shoulders. The other officers follow his lead, maintaining their dignity but seeming less tense than before. This way, please. I direct them toward the holding area. The camp is quiet today, just the normal sounds of daily operations. No shouting, no harsh commands, no signs of the cruelty they probably expected. I watch General Mori scan the compound, his eyes lingering on each building, each guard, each detail. He's still cautious, still uncertain, but something has shifted. The rigid set of his jaw has softened just slightly. Maybe he's starting to realize this isn't the hell he imagined it would be. I stood at attention near the barracks entrance, watching as General Mori and his men filed in. Their faces were drawn and tired from the long journey, but they maintained perfect military bearing. Even in defeat, their discipline was remarkable. "Sergeant Hayes," Lieutenant Parker called out, "show these men to their bunks and explain the daily schedule." "Yes, sir." I stepped forward, conscious of how every Japanese officer tensed at my approach. The general's eyes met mine, dark, suspicious, and guarded. I remembered the few Japanese phrases I'd learned during training. "Kokira des," I said carefully, gesturing to the rows of beds. My pronunciation must have been terrible, but I saw a flicker of surprise cross General Mori's face. The barracks were basic but clean. Wooden bunks with fresh mattresses and blankets, footlockers for personal Mori's very panned items, and windows that let in the afternoon light. I pointed out each section, speaking slowly and using gestures when words failed. "Breakfast at 0700, I explained, pointing to the clock on the wall. "Lunch at 1200, dinner at 1800. I demonstrated the times with my fingers, making sure they understood. Private Miller and Corporal Thompson arrived with medical supplies, antiseptic, bandages, antiseptic, basic first aid items. They were young guys, barely out of their teens, and I could see their nervousness as they approached the Japanese officers. "Please," Miller said, holding out gauze and iodine to one of the wounded men. His hands were shaking slightly. "For your arm, sir." The Japanese officer looked startled at being addressed as "sir." He glanced at General Mori, who gave a slight nod, before accepting the supplies with a small bow. The food came next: hot soup, bread, and coffee. Nothing fancy, but it was fresh and plenty of it. I watched as Private Wilson, our cook's assistant, served each man with careful politeness. "Would you like more soup, sir?" he asked General Mori, miming a ladling motion. The general stared at the young private for a long moment before shaking his head. "No, thank you," he replied in halting English. Throughout the afternoon, I observed their reactions as more soldiers came through, always polite, always addressing them respectfully. The medical officer checked their wounds. The quartermaster brought clean uniforms and toiletries. Each time, the Japanese officers seemed more bewildered by the treatment. As evening approached, I showed them the washrooms and explained lights-out procedures. General Mori remained silent through most of it, but I could see him watching everything intently. His eyes followed each American soldier, studying our movements and interactions. During dinner, I noticed him picking at his food, lost in thought. The mess hall was quiet except for the clink of spoons and the occasional murmured conversation. Our cook had prepared a simple but filling meal: meat, stew, potatoes, and bread. Later, as I made my final rounds before turning in, I passed by General Mori's bunk. He was lying perfectly straight, staring up at the ceiling. The other officers were settling in for the night, but he remained motionless, his face a mask of concentration. I wondered what he was thinking about, what he made of this day that had surely defied all his expectations. Looking at him there, I was struck by how human he seemed. Not the fearsome enemy we'd been told about in training, but a man trying to make sense of a world turned upside down. I quietly moved on, leaving him to his thoughts as the camp settled into darkness. I've been stationed at Camp McCoy for 6 months now, and I'm still getting used to watching over the Japanese POWs. Today's my turn to oversee the mess hall during lunch. The summer heat makes the room stuffy, even with all the windows open. I noticed General Mori right away. He's hard, to miss with his perfect posture and that stern look he always wears. The other Japanese officers follow his lead, filing in with military precision. They're different from other POWs I've seen, more disciplined, quieter. "Everything okay here, boys?" I ask, trying to sound friendly. Most of them just nod, but I can tell they're still wary of us. Can't blame them, really. War does that to people. The line moves slowly as each man gets his portion. When General Mori reaches the front, something unexpected happens. He looks at the food, today's standard meat and potatoes, then glances up at me. His eyes show uncertainty, something I haven't seen in him before. "Excuse me," he says in broken English, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is possible. Brown rice?" The mess hall goes quiet. Even the cooks stop what they're doing. It's the first time I've heard the general make a personal request. The way he says it, like he's afraid of being denied, makes my chest tighten. "Brown rice?" I repeat, making sure I heard right. He nods, and I notice his hands gripping his tray a little tighter. "From home?" he adds softly. "Miss, home food." Something in his voice hits me hard. Here's this proud Japanese general, probably used to commanding hundreds of men, asking for a simple bowl of rice. I look around at the other officers watching us, their faces showing a mix of concern and curiosity. "Let me talk to the kitchen staff," I tell him. "We'll see what we can do." He bows slightly, always so formal, and moves along with his regular meal. I catch Private Miller's eye and motion him over. "Hey, get me Cook Sanders," I say. "I've got an idea." Later that afternoon, I meet with Sanders and share what happened. He scratches his head, looking thoughtful. "Don't have brown rice," he says, "but I got something better in mind. My cousin served in California, learned some Japanese cooking from the community there before the war. Might take some doing, but we spend the rest of the day pulling strings, making calls to nearby towns, and gathering what we need." Sanders seems excited about the challenge, and I can't help but feel the same way. It's not often we get to do something special for these men. The next day, I'm watching when General Mori comes in for lunch. He's got that same stoic expression, probably expecting another regular meal. But when he reaches the front of the line, Sanders personally hands him a tray. I wish I had a camera to capture the look on his face. His eyes widen as he stares at the plate of carefully prepared sushi and a steaming bowl of ramen. The other officers behind him crane their necks to see what's happening. Mori stands there, frozen, looking from the food to Sanders to me. His hands tremble slightly as he holds the tray. For a moment, that stern military mask slips, and I see something else, raw emotion that he quickly tries to hide. "This," he starts to say, but words seem to fail him. He looks at me questioningly, as if trying to understand why we would go to such trouble. I've been assigned to oversee the Japanese officers' barracks, and I can't help but notice General Mori's quiet dignity. Even in captivity, he carries himself with remarkable composure. Today, I decide it's time to break down some barriers. Walking across the yard, I see him sitting alone on a wooden bench, his weathered hands clasped in his lap. The autumn breeze rustles through the nearby trees, carrying the scent of pine. I take a deep breath, remembering the Japanese phrases I've been practicing. "Konnichiwa, Mori-san," I say, bowing slightly. My accent is terrible, but I've been studying whenever I can. His head snaps up, surprise flickering across his face before he quickly masks it. "Sergeant Hayes," he responds formally in accented English. I sit down beside him, leaving enough space to be respectful. "Beautiful day," I say, then attempt the same in Japanese. "Ii tenki desu ne?" For the first time I see something, like amusement in his eyes. "You're Japanese." "Needs work," he says slowly in English. I laugh, and to my amazement, the corner of his mouth twitches. "I'm learning," I tell him. "My mother was a schoolteacher. She always said understanding starts with language." Mori nods thoughtfully. "Your mother is wise woman." We sit in comfortable silence for a moment. Then I gesture to a cherry tree nearby, one of the few in the camp. We planted that last spring. The colonel thought it might make things feel more familiar. Mori looks at the tree, and something softens in his expression. "In Japan, cherry blossoms represent the fleeting nature of life," he says carefully. "We call it mono no aware, the gentle sadness of things. I lean forward, genuinely interested. Please, tell me more about that. For the next hour, Mori explains Japanese concepts I've never heard of. About honor, about the changing seasons, about finding beauty in imperfection. His English isn't perfect, and my Japanese is worse, but somehow we manage. When he describes his hometown near Mount Fuji, his voice takes on a warmth I've never heard before. You must miss it, I say softly. He stiffens slightly, as if remembering who we are, prisoner and guard, enemy and enemy. But then he suppresses me again. Hi, yes, very much. I reach into my pocket and pull out a small book of Japanese phrases I've been studying. Maybe you could help me with this? And I could help you with English? Mori takes the book, his hands careful as he flips through the worn pages. I can see him wrestling with something internally, probably the same thing I'm struggling with. We're supposed to be enemies, yet here we are, sharing stories and offering to teach each other. Finally, he hands the book back. Perhaps, he says, and though his voice is neutral, there's something different in his eyes. Tomorrow? I stand up, smiling. Tomorrow then, General. As I walk away, I glance back. Mori is still sitting on the bench, staring at the cherry tree. I wonder what he's thinking. But more than that, I wonder how two people who were taught to hate each other can find common ground over something as simple as language and cherry blossoms. Just before I turn the corner, I see him reach out and pick up a fallen cherry blossom, turning it gently in his hands. In that moment, he looks less like a captured general and more like a man far from home, finding comfort in a small reminder of everything he left behind. I've been watching General Mori for weeks now, trying to understand this proud Japanese officer who seems to carry the weight of his entire nation on his shoulders. Today feels different, though. The late summer evening has brought a gentle breeze to Camp McCoy, and Colonel Clark decided to hold what he calls a cultural exchange. Really just an excuse to let everyone relax a little. The yard between the barracks has been transformed. We've set up some tables, brought out refreshments, and even managed to get permission for some music. Nothing fancy, just an old record player. But it's something. I notice Mori standing at the edge of the gathering, his posture rigid as always, but there's something different in his eyes. They're scanning the crowd, not with suspicion like before, but with curiosity. Other Japanese officers huddle near him, speaking in low voices. Would you like some lemonade, sir? I approach him, holding out a cup. After our previous conversations, I've learned that addressing him with respect matters deeply to him. He accepts the drink with a slight bow. Thank you, Sergeant Hayes. His English is improving, though he still speaks carefully, measuring each word. More prisoners begin to mingle with our soldiers. Some are talking about baseball. Apparently, it's popular in Japan too. Others are attempting to teach each other words in their respective languages. The atmosphere feels lighter than I've ever seen it. Your men, Mori gestures to a group, of American soldiers chatting with some Japanese officers. They are not what we expected. What did you expect, sir? I ask, genuinely curious. He pauses, considering his words. We were told Americans were barbarians. That capture would be. He shakes his head, leaving the thought unfinished. I see Colonel Clark approaching us, his presence commanding respect without intimidation. He's carrying something. Looks like a go board we found in town. The colonel had asked me earlier about Japanese games, wanting to make this evening special. General Mori, Colonel Clark says, nodding respectfully. I understand you're quite skilled at Go. Would you care to join me? I watch Mori's face carefully. There's surprise there. Then something else. Recognition, perhaps. The kind that comes when you see someone as more than just their uniform. It would be my honor. Mori responds, his voice softer than usual. They settle at a nearby table, and I bring them fresh drinks. The Go board between them becomes like a bridge, connecting two worlds that were supposed to be enemies. Other prisoners and soldiers gather around, watching with interest as these two commanding officers engage in this ancient game of strategy. What strikes me most is how natural it feels. The tension that usually fills the camp has eased, if only for tonight. I catch glimpses of Mori's face as he plays, the stern mask occasionally slipping to reveal small smiles, moments of consideration, even respect for his opponent's moves. But I can see the struggle too. Sometimes, when he thinks no one is watching, his expression clouds over. I recognize that look. It's the same one I've seen in other soldiers' eyes when they're fighting battles inside themselves. He's caught between the world he knew and the one he's discovering here, and I can tell it's tearing him apart. The game continues as the sun sets over Camp McCoy, casting long shadows across the yard. More prisoners and soldiers have joined the attack, gathering, their voices a mix of English and Japanese floating on the evening air. I've never seen General Mori look so uncertain. He stands at the entrance of the mess hall, his usually rigid posture slightly softened by confusion. Behind him, other Japanese officers peek around his shoulders, their eyes wide at the sight before them. "Please, come in," I say in my basic Japanese, gesturing toward the tables. The mess hall has been transformed for Thanksgiving. Paper turkeys and autumn leaves decorate the walls. The long tables are covered in white cloths, not fancy, but better than usual. The smell of roasted turkey mingles with the aroma of fresh sushi and steaming ramen. We'd worked hard to prepare this feast. The camp cooks spent days learning to make Japanese dishes, determined to get them right. Some of the POWs even helped, though Mori kept his distance during the preparations. "General Mori," I say, switching to English, "would you like to sit here?" I point to a spot, near the head of the table. He nods, maintaining his dignity despite his obvious bewilderment. The other officers follow his lead, filing in quietly. I notice their stunned expressions as they take in the spread before them. Traditional Thanksgiving dishes, turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, sit alongside carefully prepared Japanese food. The sushi isn't perfect, but we did our best. "What is meaning of this? Celebration?" Mori asks in halting English, as he settles into his chair. His eyes keep darting between the turkey and the sushi rolls. I sit down across from him, choosing my words carefully. "This is Thanksgiving. It's one of our most important holidays." I pause, making sure he's following. "It's about giving thanks for what we have, and sharing with others." Mori's expression changes subtly, just a slight softening around his eyes. He picks up his chopsticks, studying the unusual combination of foods on his plate. "Long time ago," I continue, "when first Americans came here, they had very little food. Native Americans, the people who lived here first, helped them survive by sharing their food." I motion to the feast, spread before us. Now we remember that kindness by sharing meals with family and friends. I watch as Mori takes this in. He looks down at his plate, then at the American soldiers and Japanese officers sitting together, attempting awkward conversation in mixed Japanese and English. "In Japan," he says slowly, "we also have festivals for giving thanks." He picks up a piece of sushi with his chopsticks. "But never thought to share with." He pauses, searching for the right word. "Enemies. Not enemies today," I say quietly. "Today, we're just people sharing a meal." Mori nods, and for the first time since arriving at Camp McCoy, I see him smile, just slightly, but it's there. He takes a bite of turkey, then reaches for the ramen. Around us, the mess hall fills with the soft murmur of conversation and the clink of utensils. I watch as General Mori helps himself to more food, his movements becoming more relaxed. The other Japanese officers follow his example, some even attempting to use forks alongside their chopsticks. The barrier between captor and captive seems to thin, if only for this moment. "Sergeant Hayes," Mori says, his voice softer than usual. "Thank you for explaining." He gestures at the food, but I sense he means more than just the meal. This is good way to understand each other. I watch General Mori from across the yard, noting how his shoulders slump when he thinks no one's looking. Something's eating at him. I can tell. After weeks of observing the Japanese officers, I've learned to read their subtle shifts in mood, the way their military bearing cracks just a little when the weight gets too heavy. Today, Mori sits alone on a wooden bench, staring at nothing in particular. His breakfast tray sits untouched beside him. The other prisoners give him space, treating him with the respect his rank demands, but I can see the isolation is doing him no good. "Sir," I say softly in my broken Japanese, approaching him carefully. "May I join you?" He looks up, and for a moment, I see raw pain in his eyes, before his usual mask slips back into place. "Sergeant Hayes," he acknowledges with a slight nod. I settle beside him, keeping a respectful distance. The morning air is crisp, and steam rises from the coffee cups on his tray. "The food's getting cold," I say, gesturing to his untouched breakfast. "I do not deserve such luxuries," he mutters, almost to himself. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My men. So many of my men. I understand immediately. Survivor's guilt. I've seen it before in other soldiers. Sir, surviving doesn't dishonor their memory. His hands clench into fists on his knees. You do not understand, Hayes-san. Each bite of food, each moment of comfort, it feels like betrayal. They died believing Americans were monsters. Yet here I sit, eating your food, accepting your kindness. From across the yard, I notice Lieutenant Sato watching us intently. He approaches, his face tight with barely concealed emotion. They exchange words in rapid Japanese that I can't follow, but the tension in their conversation is clear. Sato's voice rises slightly, and I catch fragments. Weakness, dishonor, manipulation. Mori responds quietly, but Sato cuts him off with a sharp gesture. I stand to give them privacy, but Mori catches my sleeve. Stay, Hayes-san. His voice is strained. Lieutenant Sato believes your kindness is a strategy to break our spirit. Sato's words become more heated, and I see other officers turning to watch. He's questioning everything, the comfortable quarters, the decent food, even the simple courtesies we extend. In his mind, it must all be part of some elaborate American plot. The general listens, his face growing more troubled with each passing moment. I can see the doubt, creeping in, eroding the trust we've built. When Sato finally storms off, Mori remains silent for a long time. Perhaps he is right, Mori finally says, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps this kindness, it is too much to believe. His eyes meet mine, searching for something. Truth. Deception. I'm not sure which. You treated us with respect when we expected cruelty, he continues. You feed us well when we expected starvation. You speak to us as men when we expected to be treated as animals. His voice breaks slightly. How can this be real when my dead soldiers cannot see it? I want to reassure him, to explain that our kindness isn't some elaborate trap, but I can see he's not ready to hear it. The guilt is too fresh, the loss too raw. He turns away from me, staring at the distant fence line, and I know he's seeing ghosts of fallen comrades in every shadow. I notice Lieutenant Sato pacing near the barracks, his face twisted with anger as he talks to a group of officers. Something's wrong. General Mori stands at the edge of the group, listening intently but maintaining his usual stoic expression. I can't hear what they're saying since they're speaking in Japanese, but their body language tells me enough. Everything okay over there? I ask Private Thompson, who's on guard duty nearby. Not sure, Sarge. They've been at it for about 20 minutes now. Getting pretty heated. I've learned enough Japanese to catch fragments of their conversation as I walk closer. Words like deception and honor float through the air. Lieutenant Sato's voice grows louder, more insistent. He gestures wildly toward the mess hall, where we'd served them breakfast earlier. The Americans mock us with their false kindness, Sato says in Japanese. His words clear enough for me to understand. They want to break our spirits, make us soft. We cannot trust them. General Mori remains silent, but I can see the conflict in his eyes. He's different from Sato, more thoughtful, more willing to consider that maybe we're not the monsters they were told we were. I maintain my distance, not wanting to intrude on their discussion, but I can't help feeling disappointed. After all these weeks of trying to build trust, some of them still see us as the enemy. Later that evening, I find General Mori sitting alone on a bench near the garden we let the prisoners tend. The setting sun casts long shadows across his face, making him look older, more tired than usual. May I join you, sir? I ask in my basic Japanese. He nods, shifting slightly to make room. We sit in comfortable silence for a few moments before he speaks. Sergeant Hayes, he says in careful English, why do you treat us this way? What way would that be, sir? With, he pauses, searching for the right word. Kindness. We are your enemies. I take a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. We're our enemies, sir. The war isn't over yet, but here, in this place, we don't need to be enemies. Mori's shoulders slump slightly. My men died, he says softly. Many men. Good soldiers. And here I sit, eating well, treated with respect. His voice cracks slightly. I do not deserve this kindness. Sir, with all due respect, this isn't about what anyone deserves, I reply. We're not trying to manipulate you or break your spirit, like Lieutenant Sato thinks. We're just trying to show that there's another way. That even after everything that's happened, we can still treat each other with dignity. Mori turns to look at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. Then why? Why make us special meals? Why allow us gardens? Why speak to us as equals? Because that's who we are, sir. Or at least, that's who we're trying to be. We're not perfect, but we believe that treating people with respect, even former enemies, is the right thing to do. I pause, then add, it's not about breaking your spirit. It's about offering a chance for something better. Something shifts in Mori's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight relaxing of his jaw. He looks out at the garden, where tomato plants are starting to bear fruit. Perhaps, he says quietly, perhaps there is truth in what you say. I noticed Captain Yamamoto's decline before anyone else. As the morning sun filtered through the windows of Barracks C, I saw him struggling to get up from his bunk. His weathered face was pale, and his usual dignified posture had given way to a slight tremor. Being stationed at Camp McCoy for months now, I'd grown familiar with each prisoner's routines. Yamamoto was always the first one up, but that morning, something was different. "Captain, are you all right?" I asked in my broken Japanese. He gave me a weak smile but didn't respond. General Mori was by his side in an instant, speaking quietly in Japanese. I couldn't catch all the words, but the concern in his voice was clear. Yamamoto tried to wave off their worry, but when he attempted to stand, his legs buckled beneath him. "Get Doc Miller," I called out to Private Thompson, who was nearby. "Now!" The next few days were a blur of activity. Our medical team worked around the clock, but Yamamoto's condition kept deteriorating. Doc Miller diagnosed pneumonia, complicated by what he suspected was an underlying heart condition. We moved the captain to the camp's medical ward, where the white walls and antiseptic smell seemed to make him look even more frail. I watched General Mori visit every day, sitting quietly by Yamamoto's bedside. Sometimes they would talk softly in Japanese. Other times they just sat in silence. The change in Mori was striking. Gone was the stern military bearing, replaced by a deep sadness that aged him years in just days. One evening, as I brought fresh water to Yamamoto's bedside, I overheard him speaking to Mori. His voice was barely above a whisper, but the words seemed important. Mori listened intently, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When Yamamoto finished speaking, Mori bowed his head deeply, and I saw tears in his eyes. The night Yamamoto passed, I was on duty. The medical ward was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and Yamamoto's labored breathing. General Mori sat vigil, his usually perfect posture now slumped with exhaustion. Doc Miller checked in regularly, but we all knew there was nothing more we could do. Around midnight, Yamamoto's breathing changed. I called for Doc Miller, but by the time he arrived, the captain was gone. Mori remained seated, completely still, his eyes fixed on his friend's peaceful face. The silence in the room was heavy with grief. What happened next is something I'll never forget. General Mori stood up slowly, straightened Yamamoto's blanket with trembling hands, and then bowed deeply. When he straightened, I saw the raw anguish in his eyes, not just for Yamamoto, but for all the losses this war had brought. The other Japanese officers arrived shortly after, having been notified of Yamamoto's passing. They gathered around the bed, each bowing in respect. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft weeping of Lieutenant Sato in the corner. I stood at attention near the door, feeling like an intruder in their moment of grief. But when Mori turned to leave, he caught my eye. The look we shared transcended our roles as captor and prisoner. In that moment, we were just two men who understood the cost of war and the weight of survival. That night, walking my rounds, I passed by the barracks and saw Mori sitting alone on his bunk, staring at nothing. The proud general who had arrived at our camp months ago was gone, replaced by a man grappling with questions no one could answer. I stood outside the infirmary, my heart heavy after Captain Yamamoto's passing. The old officer had become a familiar face during his illness, and his death left an emptiness in the camp that seemed to affect everyone. Through the window, I could see General Mori sitting alone on a wooden bench, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. Taking a deep breath, I walked over and sat beside him. For a long moment, we just shared the silence. The evening sun cast long shadows across the camp grounds, and somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing. "My father passed away when I was 12, I said softly, breaking the quiet. He was a school teacher in Wisconsin, not far from here, actually. I noticed Maury turned slightly toward me, listening. He loved teaching kids about the world, showing them that there was more out there than just our small town. Maury nodded slowly. Your father. He was good, man? His English was improving, though he still struggled with articles. Yeah, he was. I smiled, remembering. He used to say that everyone has a story worth hearing, if you just take the time to listen. Even when times were tough during the Depression, he'd invite his students' families over for dinner. Mom would somehow stretch what little we had to feed everyone. Everyone. Your mother. Maury hesitated, searching for the words. She is kind woman? The kindest, I replied, pulling out my wallet and showing him a worn photograph. That's her there, with my little sister Sarah. Mom still runs the local library back home. She writes me every week, telling me about all the books she's reading to the neighborhood kids. Maury studied the photograph carefully, his expression softening. Happy family, he said quietly. After a moment, he reached into his own pocket and withdrew a carefully folded piece of paper. It was a photograph of his own family, his wife and 2 daughters in traditional Japanese dress. Beautiful, I said sincerely. How old are your daughters? How old are your daughters? Youngest is 10, he replied, his finger gently touching the image. Oldest, 14. There was a profound sadness in his voice that made my heart ache. We sat there sharing stories about our families, his daughter's love for poetry, my sister's determination to become a doctor, his wife's skill at arranging flowers, my mother's famous apple pie. With each story, I could see the walls between us crumbling just a little more. Sergeant Hayes, Maury said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. Why you show such kindness? We are, he paused, struggling with the word, enemy. I thought carefully before answering. General, my father taught me that there's no such thing as a simple enemy. We're all just people trying to protect what we love. I gestured to our photographs. We both have families waiting for us. We both know what it's like to lose someone we care about. Maybe that makes us more alike than different. Maury was quiet for a long time, looking at the setting sun. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Perhaps. Your father was right. He turned to face me fully, and I saw something new in his eyes. Not just grief or confusion, but a glimmer of understanding. That evening, as we sat sharing memories of the people we loved and missed, I watched General Maury transform from the stern, suspicious prisoner I'd first met into something else entirely. A father missing his daughters, a husband longing for his wife, a man carrying the weight of loss just like the rest of us. I stood outside the barracks, nervously turning the small wooden box in my hands. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Camp McCoy's grounds, and a cool Wisconsin breeze rustled through the trees. I'd spent the last few nights carefully crafting this box in the camp's workshop, sanding each edge until it was smooth as silk. My fingers traced the simple design I'd carved into the lid, a crane in flight, something I'd seen in a book about Japanese art. It wasn't perfect, but I hoped General Maury would understand the gesture. Inside, I'd placed a carefully written note along with the brown rice I'd finally managed to get through our supply channels. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the barracks door. General Maury? I called out, in my still clumsy Japanese. May I come in? He answered in English, his voice carrying that familiar formal tone. Please enter, Sergeant Hayes. I found him sitting at his small desk, reviewing some papers. He stood when I entered, and I noticed how different he looked from the stern officer we'd first brought to camp. There was a softness in his eyes now, though he still carried himself with military precision. I brought you something, I said, feeling suddenly awkward. Here I was, a young sergeant from Minnesota, giving a gift to a Japanese general, but something in his expression gave me courage. I know it's not much, but I held out the box, and Maury took it carefully, as if handling something precious. His fingers moved over the carved crane, and I saw a flicker of emotion cross his face. You made this? He asked quietly. I nodded. The carving's not great, but I gestured for him to open it. When he lifted the lid and saw the brown rice and note inside, his hands trembled slightly. I watched as he read the words I'd written. For your journey home, General, may it remind you of the good in people, no matter where you go. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence in the barracks was heavy with meaning. I saw him swallow hard, his usual composure wavering. "Sergeant Hayes," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is..." He paused, searching for the right words in English. "This is more than I deserve." "No, sir," I replied firmly. "It's exactly what you deserve, what everyone deserves, to be treated with kindness." Maury's eyes met mine, and I saw in them a depth of gratitude that made my throat tight. Here was a man who'd come to us expecting the worst of humanity, and instead found something else entirely. "The crane," he said, running his finger over the carving again. "In Japan, it represents hope," I finished. "And peace. I read about it in the library." A small smile touched his lips, the first real smile I'd seen from him. "You have learned much about my culture, and you've taught me much about humanity, sir," I responded honestly. "We all have." I watched as he placed the box carefully on his desk, positioning it just so, treating it like a treasure rather than the simple thing it was. In that moment, I understood that sometimes the smallest gestures could build the biggest bridges between people. The general bowed deeply, a gesture I knew held great significance in his culture. I returned the bow, though not as gracefully, and saw his eyes crinkle slightly at my attempt. "Thank you, John Hayes," he said, using my first name for the first time. I stand at attention as Colonel Clark addresses our unit, the morning sun casting long shadows across the camp grounds. The news we've been waiting for finally arrives. Japan has surrendered. My heart pounds as I process what this means, especially for the Japanese prisoners we've come to know over these months. Through the crowd, I spot General Maury standing with his officers. His face remains stoic, but I've learned to read the subtle changes in his expression. There's something in his eyes, a mixture of relief and uncertainty that makes him look older somehow, more vulnerable. After the announcement, I watch as the Japanese prisoners gather in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Some weep openly, others maintain rigid composure. General Maury stands apart from them, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. I approach him carefully, noting how different he seems from the proud, suspicious man who first arrived at Camp McCoy. "General," I say softly in my broken Japanese, "would you like to take a walk?" He nods, and we make our way along the fence line. The late summer breeze carries the scent of pine needles and fresh-cut grass. We've walked this path many times before, but today feels different. "So it is over," he says in careful English. We've been teaching each other our languages, and his English has improved considerably. "We will return home soon." "Yes, sir. The arrangements are being made now." He stops walking and turns to face me. "I came here expecting to die," he admits. "We all did. We believed terrible things about American soldiers." "I know," I reply softly. "We believed terrible things about you too." A hint of a smile crosses his face. "And now?" "Now I know better," I tell him. "We all do." We continue walking, and I notice how his shoulders seem lighter, as if a great weight has been lifted. The man beside me is not the same person who arrived here months ago, rigid with suspicion and fear. This Maury moves with a quiet grace, his eyes clear and peaceful. "When I return to Japan," he says, "nothing will be the same. Our cities, our people." He pauses, struggling to find the words. "But perhaps that is good. Perhaps we needed to change." "We all did, sir," I respond. "War changes everyone." He stops again, turning to face me fully. "Sergeant Hayes," he says, his voice thick with emotion, "I must thank you. You showed me that kindness exists even between enemies. That humanity." He searches for the right words. "Humanity is stronger than hate." I feel my own eyes growing moist. "You taught me just as much, sir. About dignity, about honor." We stand in silence for a moment, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Around us, the camp bustles with activity, as preparations begin for the prisoners' return journey. But here, in this quiet moment, time seems to stand still. "I never thought," Maury says softly, "that I would find peace in a prison camp. But here, among those I was taught to hate, I have found something I lost long ago." I wait, letting him find his words. "I have found my humanity again," he finishes, and for the first time since I've known him, I see complete serenity in his expression. We continue our walk in companionable silence, both understanding that these moments together are drawing to a close. The war may be over, but its greatest lesson, the power of compassion to bridge even the widest divides, will stay with us forever. I stand at the dock, watching as General Mori and the other Japanese prisoners board the transport ship that will take them home. The morning fog rolls in from the Pacific, shrouding the vessel in a ghostly mist. My throat feels tight as I observe Mori's straight-backed figure ascending the gangplank, his military bearing still evident despite everything that's happened. "General Mori," I call out, breaking protocol one last time. He turns, and I see a flicker of emotion cross his usually stoic face. I hurry forward, clutching a small package. "Sir, I wanted to give you something for the journey." He accepts the bundle with both hands, a gesture of respect I've come to understand during our time together. Inside is a collection of photographs I took around Camp McCoy, snapshots of daily life, the Thanksgiving celebration, and quiet moments that captured our shared humanity. "Thank you, Hayes-san," he says in his careful English. The honorific makes me smile. Some habits die hard. His eyes linger on the top photograph, one of us sharing tea in the mess hall. As the other prisoners file past us, I notice how different they look from when they first arrived. Gone are the suspicious glares and tense shoulders. Many nod to me as they pass, some even offering small smiles. These men aren't the faceless enemies I was trained to fight. They're just people, trying to make sense of a world torn apart by war. The ship's horn blasts, startling a flock of seagulls into flight. "Time to go, sir," I say quietly. Mori nods, tucking the photos carefully into his jacket pocket. He stands there for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. Finally, he speaks. "I came here expecting monsters," he says slowly. "Instead, I found..." He pauses, searching for the right words. "I found friends." The simple statement hits me hard. I think about all the barriers we've broken down over these months. Language, culture, prejudice. I remember teaching him English phrases while he taught me Japanese customs, sharing stories about our families, and learning that our differences weren't as vast as we'd been led to believe. As the ship pulls away from the dock, I watch Mori standing at the rail. Other prisoners gather around him, their faces turned toward home. The vessel moves slowly through the harbor, growing smaller with each passing minute. Through my binoculars, I can see Mori on deck, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Sometimes he turns to speak with his fellow officers, but mostly he stands in quiet contemplation. The morning wears on, and I stay at the dock long after most others have left. Through my binoculars, I observe how Mori occasionally reaches inside his jacket, where I know he's keeping the photographs and that small wooden box of brown rice. His expression, even from this distance, seems lost in thought, as if he's already processing the profound changes these months of captivity have wrought in him. The ship grows smaller and smaller, until it's just a speck on the vast Pacific. Even then, I maintain my vigil, thinking about the remarkable transformation I've witnessed. Mori came to us as an enemy, convinced of our brutality. He's leaving as something entirely different, a man who's discovered that humanity exists even in those we're taught to hate. Finally, the ship disappears completely into the morning haze. I lower my binoculars, my arms heavy with more than just physical fatigue. The war might be over, but its greatest lesson, NDC, that compassion can bridge even the widest divides, will stay with all of us forever. I stood on the deck of the transport ship, watching as General Mori and the other Japanese officers disembarked at Yokohama Harbor. The morning sun cast long shadows across the war-torn port, where crowds of families waited anxiously behind military barriers. My heart ached as I observed the reunion, from afar, knowing this would likely be the last time I'd see the man who had taught me so much about human dignity. Through my binoculars, I could make out Mori's figure as he descended the gangway. His posture was different now, less rigid, more open. A small woman, who I assumed was his wife, rushed forward despite the soldiers' attempts to maintain order. Their embrace brought tears to my eyes. Behind them, their children, 2 teenagers, approached more cautiously, as if unsure of the stranger their father had become. Several former military officials were also present, their faces stern and disapproving. I noticed how they watched Mori's warm interactions with his family, their expressions a mix of confusion and judgment. The old Mori would have maintained strict formality, But this man before me knelt down to hug his children right there on the dock. Through my interpreter's scope, I saw him reach into his coat and pull out the wooden box I had given him. He opened it, carefully, showing his family the brown rice inside. His wife covered her mouth, and even from this distance, I could see her shoulders shake with emotion. A few weeks later, word reached me through official channels that Mori had accepted a position with Japan's new diplomatic corps. He was working to rebuild relationships between our nations, using his experiences at Camp McCoy to bridge the vast cultural divide. My heart swelled with pride, knowing that the seeds of peace we had planted had taken root. My last glimpse of him came through a photograph in a military dispatch. The image showed Mori standing before the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, my wooden box clutched in his weathered hands. His head was bowed in prayer, and though the picture was in black and white, I could imagine the emotion on his face, the same profound mixture of grief and hope I had seen so many times during our conversations at camp. The caption described how he had spoken to a group of school children about the importance of understanding between nations. He had shown them the box, telling them it represented more than just a gift of rice. It was a symbol of how humanity could triumph over hatred. Looking at that photograph, I remembered our last conversation at Camp McCoy. Sometimes, he had told me, the greatest victory is not won on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments when we choose to see the humanity in our enemies. As I tucked the dispatch away in my footlocker, I knew he was right. The war had taken so much from all of us, but it had also given us this, a chance to prove that kindness could survive even in the darkest of times. As I read reports of Mori's diplomatic work, I felt grateful to have played a small part in his journey from enemy to ally, from soldier to peacemaker. Through it all, that simple wooden box remained with him, a reminder that even in war, there is room for compassion, and that sometimes the smallest gestures of kindness can change not just one life, but the course of history itself. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.